Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. A couple of months ago, a co-worker of mine gave me a questionnaire that I very much enjoyed responding to. It was all about my reading habits and my development as a reader. And as I was answering these questions, I thought, wow, this would make, I think, a very interesting video for my channel. But here's the problem. We had maybe about 20 questions in this thing, and I thought to myself, if I make a video about this, it's going to be a 4.5 hour video. So why don't I take some of these questions, maybe the most interesting ones, and make separate videos about them and see if there is any interest in these. The first one that I wanted to address is, what kind of reader were you as a child? My friends, I hope you will join me in this journey to the past. It's going to be a very nostalgic journey because I am going to show you the books that I read when I was a kid. From the moment that I learned to read up to the time when I was maybe about 10 or 11 years old. So, if you're ready, let's see what we have. Okay, so here we go. Since we're looking at the books that I read as a child, I thought I would show you the first one, the first book that I ever read in my entire life, which was this one. Just kidding. It was more like this. Okay. I remember kindergarten. I have very vivid memories of that time in my life, believe it or not. And at one point, they asked us, the teacher asked us to bring a book so that we could learn how to read. I don't think they actually taught us how to read that quickly, but what we were doing was more like looking at drawings and kind of making up the stories as we went, which is a very good step, actually, if you think about it. This is a French book that was translated into Spanish. It has all sorts of Australian animals, so it was based on that type of fauna. And I think, you know, this book is very, very close to me for that reason, because I remember those days, and I remember looking at this book right there in kindergarten. Many of the other books that I have from that time follow the same pattern. They had animal characters. This one, the one with the squirrel, was one of my favorites. And there were so many of them. They were part of a collection. Very simple stories. This will give you an idea of sort of what it was like. So I have many books from the same collection. They're all, you know, animal stories. And then also other books that were very simple, the typical, you know, cardboard type of book that you can see here, with a very interesting kind of a shape, a very long little book. And you can see lots of different stories here. At that point, it didn't really catch my attention that this book came from a completely different culture to my own. Actually, if you look at the publishing date for this one, I don't think you'll be able to see it here, and my camera will probably not cooperate, but it says Pestalozzi Verlag Erlangen. So this is from Germany. This is a book from Germany, and not only that, it's from, as it says in Spanish, the República Federal de Alemania. So it was back when Germany was still divided. So we're looking at very old books here. This one was also from Germany, and I Go to Kindergarten is the title. They were all translated, of course, and they showed these very nice drawings. So I remember looking at these so many times. They were all parts of a collection. Like you can see, this one has, you know, one about the kid visiting the doctor, and one about dogs, one about a car. And I have all of these, but I have no idea where they are, so I'm just showing you the ones that I could find. We're going to talk about childhood books, quote unquote, right? We need to talk about comic books because that is a huge part of most people's childhood. Most of these are pretty much destroyed, right? These came with the action figures, and I have all of these action figures somewhere. Some of them were translated into Spanish, others, because the action figure was imported, were not. So I looked at these a million times. As you can see, they're pretty beat up, because I would always look at these things, you know. It was my type of reading. Also, I have a lot that deal with religious topics, as you can see here. My mother is a very spiritual person, and I inherited that from her. So I would look at these little books. I remember, like, you know, reading them over and over again. And we had also some from the Jewish Bible, like this one. Many other types of religious books also like these. So you can see it was that kind of a, illustrated type of book with very simple stories from the Bible and things like that. So I spent a lot of my childhood looking at those. Then I also wanted to show you a classic from Argentina that our kindergarten teacher would read to us, which is Dylan Kifke. Maria Elena Walsh is huge in Argentina, very, very important author for us. And this is one of our most famous books for kids. And the teacher would read to us, and we would just sit there, wondering what would happen with the story. And this is a fantastic story. This you would probably recognize because this is a part of so many people's childhood. This is a little bit later on, I guess. Choose Your Own Adventure was just a great way to get kids started in their reading journey. And I had maybe about, 20 of these books. I didn't have all of them. These were some of the ones that I had. And I think this one, Hyperspace, was probably the first one that I had. So I read this one, all the possible endings that you could get in the book and all of that kind of stuff. Then I have these. These are very similar to Choose Your Own Adventure. They were a little series also. And you could also decide what to read, right? You could choose a pattern or make a decision, and then depending on that, you would get a different outcome. So these are very similar to Choose Your Own Adventure, but they are more like, illustration oriented. I also had a collection of what they called the Open Sesame, or the Sesame Street Encyclopedia. In Spanish it was called Ábrete Sésamo, it's Open Sesame. And you had one of these books for each letter of the alphabet. So you can see a couple of them here. And for each one of them, they focused on different words that began with the letters, right? You had all of these drawings, activities that were interactive also that you could try at home, like these things you see. So many options, and I loved looking at these books. And of course they went from A to Z. I'm gonna see if I can show you how the whole thing looked like, the whole collection. I have more comic books here that are specific, local comic books like Condorito. Condorito is huge in the southern cone in South America. They always looked like this. These were the colors that they used, and they were a lot of fun. And also, speaking of comic books, if you are from Argentina, you have read and you have at one point encountered the immortal Patorusu. This is something that, is just a huge there, and I have so many of them. These are the reissues. Okay, I do have the original ones in a drawer somewhere here, but they're like buried under a pile of other stuff, so I'm showing you the newer editions of them. This was a variation of it. You had the same character, but when he was a little kid, so you did have that option also. The stories are not more simple or anything like that. It's just a different version of the same character. Lots of adventures, right? They were really a lot of fun, and they were black and white, right? So, and then you had also Locuras de Isidoro. Isidoro was a character that appeared in Patorusu. He was, he's an awful character. He's always taking advantage of Patorusu, and then there are some comic books that focus on him specifically, more for adults. I have some other books from Argentina. You can see this one here by an Argentine author, Graciela Montes, who actually went on to become quite important. She won the Alfaguara Prize for a novel that she co-wrote with Emma Wolf about Marco Polo, right? So before that, she would write books for kids like this one about a tree that grew to, gigantic proportions, and people actually started to live inside this huge tree. So a very, very nice story right there, a local story for us. This one, El Bramido Horripilante, so the horrible scream or the horrible yell, something like that. And then a story that marked me quite a bit is the, of course, classic The Bottle Imp by Robert Louis Stevenson. And this was an edition with drawings and everything for kids specifically. Then I want to show you something that had a huge, tremendous impact on me as a child. And it was this book by the Chilean novelist Enrique Barrios. Ami el Niño de las Estrellas, so Ami the Star Child. And it's about this kid who has an encounter with an extraterrestrial child. It's amazing. I mean, it's just, I remember reading these books. This was the first part, then you had the second part, Ami Regresa, Ami Returns, and there was another one that was thought for like smaller kids. So this is not a continuation of the story or anything. It's just another story featuring Ami, but for more, for younger kids. I don't know if you've tried alfajores, right? If you haven't, I urge you to try them because they are one of the joys in life. And there were some alfajores that when you bought them came with these little books that had illustrated fables, right? So you can see some of the classics here by Aesop, by La Fontaine, and so many of them. They're tiny little books, right? But the drawings were by different illustrators. And there are so many of these, some of them with my favorite fairy tales and folk tales. I absolutely love folk tales. Fairy tales, fables, all of those things. I am a big fan of them and I still read them even at my age right now. So whenever you got one of these things, one of these candies that we eat a lot in Argentina, you would get one of these little books. And that was also a very good way for us kids to start reading and, start thinking about meaningful stories. So I have a lot of those too. Finally, I wanted to show you a little collection that was put together by the magazine Anteojito. This is a Biblioteca de Oro del Estudiante, so the student's golden library. And what it has is basically a bunch of, short versions of classics of universal literature. So some of them are local by Argentine authors, but then you can see some of them are, the typical classics that you would encounter in a collection of, literature, like world literature. These are not complete, of course. They are simplified versions or maybe sometimes, summaries of what happens in the story. But I think it's a good way, a great way actually, to get kids started with reading and get them interested in literature. Many of these I looked at later on when I was an adult and I really enjoyed, like Dostoevsky's White Nights. And they all had illustrations that were, I thought, very well done. You can see this one for White Nights right here. Many of the classics that I decided to read later on as an adult, I first encountered in this collection. So I'm really, really thankful to it. So you can see some classics of Argentine literature like the Martín Fierro and all of the books that in previous generations kids would read actually as children. I don't think anybody or very few people read these books anymore as children. So I think that is actually something that helped me a lot when it came to deciding what books were important for me to read. There were two collections. I'm just showing you the red one first. Then they also had a blue one that was a little bit different. The titles of the books in the blue one are not as well known as the ones that you can see here. So it was quite complete. We have another local author, Lucio V. Lopez, Rubén Darío, the great poet from Nicaragua, but also classics like Treasure Island by Stevenson. So quite varied, actually. This one, I absolutely loved it. This was the first time that I encountered Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Gold Bug, which to this day I think is one of the best short stories ever written. If you haven't read The Gold Bug, please do so. Let me know what you think. I'm sure that you will absolutely love it. So I highly recommend that. I do want to say that I did not read all of these. Right? This one was a tremendous influence on me. Horacio Quiroga's Cuentos de la Selva, the jungle stories. But going back to what I was saying, I have not read all of these, and I did not read all of them when I was a kid either. But I would pick them up, and if what I read interested me, then I would continue reading. And then later on, as an adult, I would find the complete version of the book. So that was the red collection. A couple of years later, they released this blue one that has many big titles, as you can see, Jane Eyre, but also other titles, Just So stories also, But other titles too that were not as well known. For instance, you have here Emilio Salgari. I don't know if in this English-speaking world many people read Emilio Salgari, but in terms of adventure stories of the kind that Jules Verne wrote, he was also another very influential author. But look at this one, The Last Days of Pompeii. So many stories right here. Asimov, we had also The Little Flowers of St. Francis. More of the same authors also from the previous collection, like Jack London and many others. This is a local. There were more local authors in this blue collection. The Last of the Mohicans. These were, stories about the Argentine North, the Canterville Ghost. I like this book right here, Far Away and Long Ago by William Henry Hudson, a writer that is considered to be part of the canon both in Argentine letters and in British letters. So quite interesting, his life. This is also from Argentina. Look at that title, Our Father the Tree. This is a book about trees and the impact that they have on us. Another title from Argentine letters, Junco, is about a rural teacher. And then you have some Cervantes, which is to be expected. Some novelas ejemplares. So many, right? All of them very short, manageable, From the blue collection, I have not read as many as I have from the red one. I still need to read The Prince and the Pauper. I'm fascinated by doppelganger stories, so that is kind of mandatory reading for me. And I still have not, experienced that book right there. Juana de Ibarburu was a great poet from Uruguay. So they tried to introduce us also to the great books of from Latin America, like the Peruvian traditions by Ricardo Palma. So there was also that nice part to it, that it was, yes, universal literature and the classics of European literature, but also from other places. So I think, they did have that advantage. Right there. This is another classic of Argentine letters, Una excursión a los indios ranqueles, more by Rubén Darío. Also a classic that people read in Spanish, right? Juan Ramón Jiménez, Platero y Yo, about the donkey and his little kid, the owner. Mark Twain. This you can definitely tell is not the complete story, right? The Mysterious Island is a very long novel, so you would get the basics with these stories right here. And the first one was this one, also by an Argentine author. Let me show you one more thing. There we go. This is my grandmother's copy of The Little Prince. I think this is a very, I treasure this book quite a bit because I love my maternal grandmother, and just knowing that this belonged to her is just, this was one of the first books that I read also, and I read it as an adult. So that's the end of my collection of childhood books. So that's the kind of reader I was as a child. Thank you so much for accompanying me in this journey. I hope you found something here that spoke to you, maybe that reminded you of your childhood, and also new things, things that were unexpected, maybe. If you have any questions, comments, recommendations, and of course if you want to answer the question for yourself, please feel free to do that. You know that I always love reading comments and anything that you have to say about these topics that I share with you. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.